We're taking a look at food and entertainment. Our next guest has just taken up the reins of Hard Rock International in Asia as the company reviews its plans to expand across the region. These plans include a theme park-like integrated resort in Japan and sites in larger cities and regional areas. Joining us from Tokyo for his first international media interview is the Hard Rock Asia CEO, Edward Tracy. Edward, great to have you with us. Tell us about sort of how optimistic you are, in particular when it comes to Japan, because we hear this story about, how it's coming out of this deflationary mindset, that consumers are still really reluctant to spend. Are you optimistic that that's going to change?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you guys again. I'm very optimistic about Japan. It's a process that you have to go through to allow the government to establish what the criteria is going to be. And in typical fashion, the developers are all very anxious for this to happen sooner rather than later. But, we recognize, we're a global brand and a global company that has operations in 74 countries. We pretty much understand what the process is like, but we do feel all the indicators are very positive.
What are your expectations in terms of time frame? Because we're still pretty far from implementation on the legislative side. And, in addition to that, the idea of having casinos and gaming operators in Japan isn't exactly, being welcomed by a lot of support by Japanese people.
Yeah, that's been an issue. And I think part of the responsibility the operators have is to try and educate the public to the degree that it can, that integrated resorts are far different than just big box casinos, which is really the history of gaming in Japan with the pachinko parlors. IRs are a totally different concept and offer a lot of entertainment, retail, convention business, and very, very good for the economy. And I think we have to take responsibility for helping to move public opinion in the right direction. In terms of the process, we do see some progress in the preliminary need for a bill that addresses problem gaming and responsible gaming had to happen first. That might call for an agenda that we see the final piece of legislation passed sometime at the end of Q2 or beginning of Q3. And that obviously moves with the process, and that process is controlled by the government. So as anxious as perhaps some of the developers are, we try to be very patient and offer our assistance wherever we can in terms of our experience and our knowledge, given the fact that we're, a global company that operates in 74 countries right now.
Edward, just taking a step back, as someone who's not a gambler, I was actually quite surprised to find out that Hard Rock operates casinos. So maybe can you elaborate, given that, there is, I guess, maybe not a lot of knowledge about how the restaurant and the gaming and the cafe businesses are really split?
Well, it's a pretty extraordinary story that is not told probably as frequently as it needs to be, and that's driven by the fact that Hard Rock International is a privately held company. So they're really not out there talking about their great success around the globe on a quarterly basis because they're not reporting their earnings necessarily. But the story is really quite evident. The fact that we have partnerships in 74 countries. We have an opportunity to market to more people than any other gaming company around the globe. We currently have 23 hotels and 13 casinos that we operate, brand, and manage. And about 200 restaurants around the world. We serve over 100 million people a year, so you can imagine the number of impressions that we could create to benefit tourism in Japan just based on the current business that we have. So we think Hard Rock brings something really extraordinary. And again, because we're not publicly traded, a lot of the detail is not known about the company. For example, the Tampa, Florida Hard Rock is the single most successful casino in America. It drives more top line and bottom line profit than any company, even in Las Vegas. And in fact, in the top 10 most profitable casinos in the world, Hard Rock Tampa is the only casino in the top 10 that's not Asia-based, meaning Macau or Singapore. So the company has had an extraordinary growth spurt and a terrific track record. And we're really just sort of scratching the surface in Asia now, except that we've been in business in Tokyo, for example, for 30 years with our partner WDI. So we really have a really interesting story. It just needs to be told more often.
You have a partner there in Japan. You're going to probably need a partner in Japan, given the framing of the current legislation. Who's it going to be, and what's your criteria for checking or who you partner with?
Well, again, we expect that there may be some information provided to us either directly in the next piece of legislation or perhaps privately in our conversations with how a partner structure might work in Japan. We suspect that there will be consortiums that will join up with operators to compete for the licenses in the various prefectures.
And you must be somewhere in that process, but what's the criteria of the person you would partner with? That was my question, really. Well,
I don't know that I want to get into a lot of detail, but the obvious targets for us are construction companies, big landowners, transportation companies, infrastructure companies that could bring expertise to the table in terms of doing a development. And how that pie gets sliced is yet to be seen. It's very hard to predict, again, until we have more information on what makes the Japanese government happy with IRs.
Certainly, there'll have to be a lot of non-gaming revenue coming from this as well, as you've indicated so far. A lot of the other people who will be bidding will offer the same sort of things. How are you going to differentiate yourself from the competition here?
Well, I think the key issue is our DNA is hospitality and entertainment. We're an entertainment company first and a casino company second. And, I've operated some of these other companies, and I know what their commitment is. But again, having the opportunity to market globally in 74 countries is something that no other company can say. And I think it's also important, we're not a public company, so it's not been disclosed as widely as it probably should have. We have the strongest balance sheet in the casino and hotel business. The company's been extraordinarily successful, and its borrowings have been extraordinarily low compared to the revenue and cash flow that it produces, and I believe we're the only gaming company in the world that has all three credit ratings at the corporate level. So, again, we have financial strength, we have experience globally, and we think we bring a very unique perspective on Asian business, given the fact that we've been here for 30 years.
Edward, very quickly, you've been in Japan many, many times. How has the mood evolved for you in the country in recent years? Very quickly.
I didn't quite hear the question. Sorry, Rashid.
I'm just asking how the mood has evolved in Japan, given how many times you've been there and your experience in recent years. Very quickly.
Well, it's a little hard to read. There are nuances. For example, there is no literal translation in Japanese for integrated resort. So when the average person hears about these developments, they think casino, and casino is really not what these developments are about anymore. As you know, the success of the integrated resort around Asia is based on, of course, there's a casino involved, but the casinos are, frankly, commoditized. And it's really the non-gaming components that drive visitation and tourism and the convention business.